I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Vivid Seats for supporting our podcast.
Vivid Seats is an online event ticket marketplace dedicated to providing fans of live entertainment with experiences that last a lifetime. Through Vivid Seats' secure and user-friendly website and free mobile app, live event fans can buy and sell tickets to a wide variety of sports, concert, theater, and comedy events taking place nationwide. So secure a spot in the audience for an upcoming event near you. See more, sit closer, check out Vivid Seats.
I'd also like to thank Close 5 as well.
Close 5 lets you buy and sell with other users nearby. You can make money fast by selling your used stuff. You can turn your clutter into cash, and it's hyper-local. You find items near you. Buyers get to set the distance they would want to browse in, so you only see items as far as you're willing to meet or pick them up. Selling is also easy with Close 5. You take a photo of your item with the in-app camera and post the listing in seconds. You don't even need to add a title, description, or price unless you want to. And once you've sold the item, you can choose a convenient public location to meet, to exchange it, and get paid immediately. So download Close 5 for free in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store today.
This has been one of the strangest political campaigns, certainly in my lifetime, I would say in many lifetimes. And I think the media has really been doing recently a lot of navel gazing in the best possible way, looking at themselves and trying to figure out what they've done right, what they've done wrong, and how they've covered this campaign. This very unusual campaign. And both as a journalist and someone who consumes news and information, I've been thinking about that a lot as well. Recently, I read an article in New York Magazine where 113 journalists were interviewed about all these issues. And the title of the article was "The Case Against the Media by the Media." So I'm not the only one asking all these questions. It seems as if journalists everywhere are doing some self-examination about how the media has comported itself during the course of this election. And who better to talk about these issues than two veteran reporters? I would argue, and I think Brian Goldsmith might agree, my sidekick Brian, with two of the finest journalists of our generation, Bob Woodward and Tina Brown.
Well, I definitely agree. These are two of the heroic characters in the history of journalism, not just journalism right now. Bob Woodward, of course, I think people have heard of, half of the famous Woodward and Bernstein duo that helped to bring down Richard Nixon. He's written or co-written 18 best-selling books, most famously, of course, All the President's Men. Tina Brown is probably a little less well-known, but she's had just as storied a career. She was the editor of Tatler, the great British gossip rag. She then became, at the age of 30, the editor of Vanity Fair and transformed that magazine into what you see today, and then became the first female editor of The New Yorker. She's founded the Daily Beast. She hosted a talk show. She wrote a best-selling book on Princess Diana. She edited Newsweek. So we're really lucky to be joined today by these two great journalists to discuss the state of media in this crazy campaign.
Bob and Tina, there has been so much hand-wringing over the way the media have been handling this election season. And I've often wondered, 20 years from now, how will journalism schools, if in fact they still exist, review the performance by journalists covering this campaign? Let me ask you straight out, Bob, what do you think? Have we embarrassed ourselves? Or is it still a relatively noble profession?
Well, I'll take a middle ground. First, I think there's been a lot of great campaign coverage. At the Washington Post, we've done this book on Donald Trump. Had 20 people work on it. If you read it, you will see, I think it's the best exposition of who he is. He spent 20 hours with the reporters. It's tough, but it lets him have his say. we're working on Hillary Clinton in the same way. I think there's no book planned at this point. But for instance, today there was a terrific story that the Post did about how Bill Clinton got $17 million from this private for-profit college while serving for 5 years as honorary chancellor. That's a lot of money. He helped. There's no question about it. His name probably assisted in the recruitment of students and donors. But you see the convergence here of all of the Clinton enterprises, the personal fundraising, the speeches, the Clinton Foundation, the Global Initiative, and now this for $17 million is not bad pay for 5 years' work, which in no way was full-time.
Tina, what is your overall view of media coverage this go-round?
I do not think it has been a stellar journalism election in any sense. I do actually happen to agree with Bob that I think that the Washington Post coverage has been by far the best. It has eaten everyone's lunch on this particular cycle. The piece you mentioned today was terrific. I will actually say, though, I think most of this coverage just seems very late to me. I mean, it seems to me that it's almost like journalists have come so late to the stories that are obvious. I mean, they shout and holler about the big sort of, the big issues of dishonesty, mendacity, but where are the details and the rigor that sort of drills down? I mean, what was to me a gratifying thing about today's story in the Post was that actually there was drilling down into one thing that was a very interesting thing, a new thing that people didn't know. I would argue that all these other stories about the Clinton, most of them are, so many of them are sort of innuendo and like massive drum rolling, and there turns out to be nothing really there. That's what I resent, is the huge drum rolls for things that aren't really there. And on the other side, Trump just for so long just seemed to get away with absolute murder, to the point that these sort of stereotypes were fixed very, very early in people's minds. So it's, it's the stereotype of Hillary being, the narrative of her being dishonest was fixed so early in people's minds, it doesn't seem to be shiftable. On the other hand, Donald Trump, all the revelations about Trump have come so late in the day that he's got away with murder all this time. So it feels to me as if, the journalists are just not, sometimes making more noise than they are forensic searching in time.
Okay, first of all, can I disagree, Tina, with that? The problem is, so many of these stories, I went back and looked at the stories the Post wrote about both Trump and Hillary. In the case of Hillary, going back to 2014, about the foundation, about all of these things in one form or another. The difficulty is there's so much out there, a good story, an important piece of the puzzle on either of these candidates. I mean, all about Trump University. We wrote about it. Steve Brill wrote about it in Time magazine. I remember last year being on one of the cable news shows saying, what about Trump University? And people just laughed. Oh, we know all about that. That's been in the New York Times, but it hasn't. And there has to be incremental coverage on these things to dig into them. But when you look, and I'm not going to bore you with the list of the stories that ran, but when you really look, there was vast coverage about Hillary Clinton. You're right. Some of it is unfair. Some of it contains innuendos that are not supported. At the same time, there is just a lot there on both of these candidates. And I think it's not just overwhelmed journalists, it's overwhelmed the public.
Well, that brings me to a question. It seems that a lot of these stories don't matter. I think this sort of overarching narrative about dishonesty, I think that's what Tina was saying about innuendo, sort of a feeling about candidates is this thing that seems to have a residual impact. But these sort of detailed stories, I don't know, is it the sheer volume of material that's being written about this campaign, or is it that people just don't really respect or trust the press anymore. Bob, I was looking at this number. Gallup reported that in 1974, the year you helped bring down a president, 69% of the public trusted the media. Today, that number is 20%. So is it volume? Is it trust? Why don't these stories seem to have a bigger impact?
Well, one thing I feel strongly is it is the volume that's one of the problems. I was just thinking the other day when you, Katie, interviewed Sarah Palin, and she said she couldn't say a newspaper that she read. Her ignorance became such a kind of defining feature that it helped to bury her. It was one of the major things that helped to bury Sarah Palin. When you compare it to the amount of ignorance that Donald Trump has shown in this election again and again and again in so many different venues, that hasn't stuck and that hasn't defined him. Why is that? Is it because it's, as Bob was saying, the volume, the very volume of the amount of stuff means that it's just not landing? Whereas when Sarah Palin went on that major news broadcast and said that thing, everybody saw it and everybody knew.
Well, it wasn't just that Sarah Palin said was an important part of it. She said many other things, too. I think,
but so is Donald Trump, Bob, and it doesn't seem to be hurting him.
Well, but the idea is let's face the facts here, and that is there are a lot of people who support Trump. Remember, he's got 40% of the people in the polls one way or another don't really care. I've talked to some of these people. They say, I don't really care that he doesn't understand this or that. He's going to be tough. He's a leader. They like his background and so forth. So it's not, and you're posing, why doesn't that hurt him? Because many, I don't know obviously the number, but I think the polling shows on this, people really think this is a Washington establishment. It's Democrats and Republicans who have allied themselves together in this kind of shadow establishment, and Trump is outside of it, and he's saying we're going to kick the hell out of it. And people like that. So the details of what he knows are irrelevant. Now, the big question that's got to be addressed, what would he do as president if he became president? My answer to that question is that we don't know. And in many ways, I think he doesn't know himself.
How scary is that?
Fair point. But, people say, okay, well, you can be practical. You get in. We know politicians get in office and they've said all kinds of things. And then they do something the opposite, most prominent. I hate to go back to Nixon. In 1968, he said he had a secret plan to end the Vietnam War. Probably lots of people voted for him on the basis of that. I was in the U.S. Navy then, and I voted for Nixon in 1968 because I thought he had the best chance of getting us out of Vietnam. We look at the record, which is very clear now. He didn't get us out of Vietnam. He withdrew troops, but he increased the bombing and certainly did not end the war.
But Bob, to your point, it's striking to me that it isn't just about Trump not knowing particular details, like when you interviewed him and he seemed not to be clear about what Abraham Lincoln did, which was a very striking thing to me.
Right. And if we should say, when we interviewed Trump a number of months ago and asked why was Lincoln successful, his answer was because he did some things that needed to be done. Well, it was baffling and jaw-dropping.
But if Sarah Palin had said that, my point is that, why did it hurt Sarah Palin when she said she could see Russia from her back door? Why did that hurt her so badly? But this comment about not even knowing, which show you didn't even know what Lincoln did, nobody really didn't boomerang on anybody.
Well, and Tina, to me, it's more than that because Trump has gotten more pants on fire ratings from fact checkers than practically any candidate ever. And that, too, doesn't seem to be resonating as much.
But also, I think you have to factor in, it's now 2016, and Sarah Palin was 8 years ago. And I think the whole media landscape has changed significantly just in that 8 years. Right. And there, again, to go, and it's not an excuse, it's an attempted description. There is a volume of stuff that is staggering. If you are in the media business, you can't even follow it.
May I also just say that I think that the universe that's been created now with 20 years of Fox News has really come to roost. And I'm very interested to see that in the National Review, the right-wing National Review, they're actually now starting to come out against Fox and say it has created a universe which has been such an echo chamber for the Republican Party that they have become a cocooned universe in which Republicans could go on, talk to themselves, talk to an audience that was strictly understood from their point of view of the world. And in a way, that volume of ignorance and the cycle of ignorance, the falsehoods and so forth that were put out constantly as facts, has taken the land, has actually borne fruit. And that's what we've got now, is a less informed electorate because they're watching the silo.
Tina, I don't think you can blame it on Fox News. I think it's part of the story.
Part of the story, absolutely. Of course, it's not all their fault, but I do think it's made a difference to the Republican Party.
Look, it's individual voters who say they don't like what's going on. They do not like this establishment in Washington and in politics. And somebody who talks tough and kicks a lot of sand and is not up on the details of all kinds of things and all kinds of history, that doesn't matter to them. And I don't know whether it's our job to sit in judgment of people. I think what people who are going to vote for Trump or vote for somebody else, but try to understand and then present who these people are in detail.
Well, I totally agree with that in the sense that, there's every reason for people to be upset and disenfranchised. There's no doubt about that. I guess the question is much more is like, why don't certain specific things make a difference?
But we may be making a mistake in making this assumption that it isn't hurting him. It's clearly hurt him a lot with college-educated white voters who are normally a pillar of the Republican coalition who are leaning toward Clinton this time. It may be helping him with blue-collar voters who historically have voted more Democratic, but it's clearly having an effect in terms of the electorate that he's able to attract.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
What do you have to lose by trying something new like Trump?
A big fat thank you to Stamps.com, a sponsor of our fledgling little podcast that could.
You know that feeling you get when you can get things done with just the click of your mouse? It can't get more convenient than that. And now you can even get your mailing and shipping done without leaving your desk, thanks to Stamps.com. Stamps.com turns your PC or Mac into your own personal post office that never closes. You talk about convenient. You can buy and print official U.S. postage for any letter or package using just your computer and printer. Then hand your mail to the mailman or drop it in a mailbox. You'll never have to go to the post office again. I highly recommend Stamps.com for its convenience, for its ease of use. It's really a terrific service. So sign up for Stamps.com. Use our promo code Katie, K-A-T-I-E, for this special offer. You'll get a 4-week trial plus a $110 bonus offer, including postage and a digital scale. So don't wait. Go to Stamps.com. Before you do anything else, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage and type in Katie. That's Stamps.com. Enter K-A-T-I-E.
Also, a big thanks to Audible for sponsoring us.
Do you love books but find that you never have time to read them? Well, Audible.com has the perfect solution. Get audiobooks and listen to those books you've been meaning to read while on the go, at the gym, during your commute. Audible.com has audiobooks from the leading audiobook publishers, broadcasters, entertainers, magazine and newspaper publishers, and business information providers. Their app is free and works on iPhones, iPads, Android devices, and Windows phones. You can also download and listen on your Kindle Fire and over 500 MP3 players. And unlike a streaming or rental service, with Audible, you own your books, so you can access them anytime, anywhere, right from your smartphone. Audible.com also has the Great Listen Guarantee. If you decide you don't like the book you choose, no worries. You can exchange a book you aren't happy with for another title anytime, no questions asked. I just downloaded American Heiress, which is Jeffrey Toobin's new book about the Patty Hearst trial, and I'm very excited to read that. And just for listeners to our show, Audible.com is offering a free 30-day trial membership. So go to audible.com/Couric today to start your free trial. Again, show your support for this podcast and get a free 30-day trial. Read a bunch of books you love at audible.com/COURIC.
What worries you both most about the way journalism has changed? You've been in the business for a very long time, and as I have, and I'm curious what you think about the current state of journalism, because yes, the sheer volume, it's hard for anything, I think, to attach itself, any narrative, although Brian said it is having some kind of impact. But we talked about volume. And also, there's such fragmentation and niche viewing or niche readers, people who want to hear their own views reflected back at them. A friend of mine said people are seeking affirmation, not information. So what worries you most about what journalism has become, acknowledging that some very good work is still being done, Bob?
Well, first, it's also, and not just the volume, it's the pace, and it's internet driven, and it reflects the impatience and speed of the internet. Tell me the headline, give it to me in 140 characters. And so the whole technology of this has dumbed down the information transfer process to people. Instead of expecting a long article, people expect something really short. And give me the soundbite. And you know yourselves, when you do interviews, give us the bottom line. And so that takes people away from an in-depth understanding of things. Now, that can't be changed. That's a reality. And quite frankly, and I think we have to confront this, no one has found a way in television, radio, print media, anything else, Buck Roger decoder rings. No one has found a way to connect the dots in a way that makes sense, in a way that is of sufficient length or time that people will absorb it.
I think that we should not underestimate the sheer impact it's having on the professionals themselves. One thing I think that is extremely dispiriting for journalists is the constant, to your point, Bob, but the constant demands to keep filing, posting 5 times a day, come in on Sunday and do Facebook Live now. All of these things, the New York Times, for instance, I know that journalists feel that as the newsroom shrinks, they're being asked to do more and more and more in regard to, short, time-consuming, time-wasting, you could argue, bursts of this and bursts of that to feed the social media beasts that are out there demanding to be fed. And of course, it means that they can't get on with their story. I mean, they can't actually spend their time doing what you were just doing, returning the call from a source and sitting there on the phone for 40 minutes and getting the story they've been pursuing. They're too busy out there having to do some darn, Facebook Live thing or whatever, which they have to keep doing to feed the beast.
Well, let's talk
about...
about...
And that is a terrible effect on the journalism, because ultimately they're constantly filing before they're ready.
And what is the Washington? I was going to say, what is the Washington Post, though, Bob, doing differently? You just mentioned a great piece that was done today. They're obviously Marty Barron, who's a great editor-in-chief and
He
somebody who
really
cares deeply about good journalism. What kind of environment is he establishing for people at the Post that is it really liberating them to do this kind of good, solid, important, critically important journalism?
Like everything, it starts with the owner. And several years ago, Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, bought the Post. And it was a year ago, it was last October, I had a conversation with Bezos, and we were talking about Nixon. And Bezos said, could we have found out about Nixon before he became president? My answer is, I don't think so, but we could have done more and better before he was elected. And so the owner, Bezos, said, okay, what we need to do is make sure that we dig into the lives and backgrounds, do a full excavation of the two remaining candidates after the primary process. And then he said, the editor, Marty Barron, will have the resources to do this. And so the Post has hired lots of new reporters. I look at the front page or some of these stories, and I know none of the bylines. I do not know who these people are, but they are fabulous reporters with experience, with the patience to dig in, and who understand what matters is incremental coverage, that you have to stick with the story, chase it to ground, and at the same time be aggressively nonpartisan and to be as fair but tough as you can.
What do you two make of the now infamous New York Times stat that Trump got $2 billion in free media coverage during this campaign? He tweeted in July about the Melania controversy, the plagiarism issue, that he believes that all press is good press. So by that standard, even if some of the $2 billion was negative, was that all helpful to him and propelling his rise?
And let me just add to Brian's point by saying New York Magazine interviewed 113 journalists, and 81% said they believe the media created Donald Trump. So how much is the media to blame for the very fact that he is the Republican nominee for President of the United States?
Well, I think a weakness of the entertainment-driven nature of the time we live in means that Donald Trump is a heck of a lot more fun to cover than Hillary Clinton. You know, the fact is that journalists cannot resist where the action is, if you like, and Trump was the action. And in that sense, I do think there was way, way too much, that without question, that he was allowed to go on there and blow hard away and
do interviews on the phone, have his entire hour and a half rallies covered without interruption.
That's right. That was insane. And, you know, the fact is that there would be sort of one sort of slightly combative second question. He would blow steam, and then you move on to your next question, instead of doing what should have been done on television, which is like just refusing to let go.
It's a lot harder to challenge somebody on the phone than it is face-to-face, by the way.
It is, but there's also the question of the second follow-up and the third follow-up and the fourth follow-up. We actually don't let somebody stop. You don't ask one question, you get a blow-off answer, and then you try a second question, you get a blow-off answer, and then you just move on. You have to stay with it.
If I may say, and challenge that a little bit, I think that, of course, we should have done more. That's always the case. But it's the voters who created Donald Trump. Let's not kid ourselves. He was ahead in the polls. He almost from the beginning, if I recall, he won primary after primary after primary. And now he's the nominee of the Republican Party. So you have to cover that. That's our job. Embedded in all, and you're right, Tina. I mean, these rallies were spectacles. I mean, it was almost like the Roman Colosseum.
Total Roman Colosseum situation, absolutely.
Yeah, but you covered those, and then people followed up, and there was lots of examination. And if you put all the clips together, you would be astonished what you never even read or were aware of because there's been so much of it.
Well, I can remember certain really good critical moments where it did happen, like with Chris Matthews, when he really nailed Trump about how when he said women who had abortion should be punished on his show, and he really was fabulous about that. I mean, he really drilled down.
And then Trump took it back.
Right, and then Trump took it back.
He changed his mind. He said, oh, no punishment.
Oh, absolutely.
But the Hillary Clinton partisans I know would say that it isn't just about the volume of coverage. It's about the tone of coverage, the kind of coverage. The Shorenstein Center put out a study that shows that Hillary got by far the most negative coverage of any candidate in either party. Trump got pretty rah-rah coverage, at least at the beginning. Does the press need to be held account for the tone that they're striking?
Some of the tone has been bad. There's no question about it. But look, Hillary Clinton has been on the public stage for so long. All of her incarnations as First Lady, Senator, Secretary of State are going to be examined. And the whole email fiasco is not something the media created. And if you look at the facts in this and you look at what we've seen, there are a multitude of stark contradictions that needs to be covered. I think in a sense, the problem Secretary Clinton has had is, and she now apparently is somewhat on the road to remedy that, to not answer questions, to not have press conferences. I've known her for decades and interviewed her some in earlier incarnations, and I think, Katie, you and Tina know so well, when you interview her and you listen to her, she's fabulous. Mm-hmm. She's incredibly informed. She can be very friendly, very open, very self-deprecating, and that's not what we've seen in the campaign. And so maybe for the next 2 months, we're going to get more.
It is curious because actually she's at her best when her back's against the wall. I mean, I think that
I agree.
Her finest hour in the last year really was the Benghazi hearings, where she's grilled and grilled and grilled and grilled and never lost her cool. 7 hours. She was well informed. She was on top of it. She never lost a beat. And yet somehow seems to have been fearful of the press pack, who were way less informed and very often way less hostile than the Benghazi hearings. So I agree that, it's not been a good strategy, but one that she seems to have adhered to, despite everybody saying she should not.
But why are they doing that? I mean, she held her first press conference in 260 days. She did start talking to reporters on the plane. And I'm curious why the hesitancy to actually talk to reporters, especially when Donald Trump was establishing the narrative every single day by talking to reporters and then creating a storyline that was being adhered to by almost every news organization.
There's a long theory, which is that if your opponent is killing themselves, let him go ahead and do it. Why should she go working herself to death, like risking sound bites of her own when he's busy falling on his face, it seems, every 10 minutes. And indeed, as Brian said, it is affecting him in the polls. But I think she has a deep-seated fear of not being perfect that must go back way into her childhood.
We're really getting her on the couch now.
I mean, I think it's true. I think that's always been an issue for Hillary, that she can never really say, yes, I got that wrong, and move on. Like, she couldn't say, I got the Iraq vote wrong. All the way through the last campaign, she always gave 15 caveats about why it was the wrong vote, but. Instead of just saying, you know what, I got it wrong. Bad consequences. If I could do it again, I wouldn't.
I have to ask Bob about this Paul Krugman column, and Tina, I'd love your view on it too, that Hillary Clinton gets gored, basically saying the media coverage of her has been patently unfair. He compared it to what happened to Al Gore against George W. Bush during that campaign. And he writes, throughout the campaign, most media coverage gave the impression that Mr. Bush was a bluff, straightforward guy while portraying Al Gore, whose policy proposals added up and whose critiques of the Bush plan were completely accurate, as slippery and dishonest. And right now, I and many others have the sick, sinking feeling that it's happening again. True, there aren't many efforts to pretend that Donald Trump is a paragon of honesty, but it's hard to escape the impression that he's being graded on a curve. If he seems to suggest that he wouldn't round up all 11 million undocumented immigrants right away, he's moving into the mainstream. And many of his multiple scandals, like what appears to be clear payoffs to state attorneys general to back off investigating Trump University, get remarkably little attention. Meanwhile, we have the presumption that anything Hillary Clinton does must be corrupt, most spectacularly illustrated by the increasingly bizarre coverage of the Clinton Foundation. Anyway, I could go on and on, but Bob, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, Paul Krugman is an ardent partisan and has very strong views about this. In that column, he says, well, George W. Bush lied about what he was going to do with taxes. I spent months looking at the origins, development, and final passage of the Bush tax cuts. Bush was quite straightforward. He was going to lower taxes for everyone, and he did. And now the economic consequences of that, Krugman and others are very critical of, and that's reasonable. Hillary Clinton's got to be accountable. She's running for president. And the idea that, I mean, look, we all know hundreds of journalists. And yes, there are some who are partisan one way or another. But by and large, journalists want to get it right. They aren't sitting around and say, let's gore Hillary, or, gee, I don't like Hillary. There's too much out there. There are too many questions. There's too much history and past, and it's got to be addressed. And it is. I think the answer is for her, quite frankly, is to sit down with you two and,
Believe me, I've been trying, Bob, and they keep blowing me off.
Yeah, but I mean, isn't that, Katie, I've known you for years. I have no idea. You could torture me and I couldn't tell you what your politics are. I have no idea. You're a journalist. You're trying to figure out what happened. You would give her a fair hearing, but a tough hearing.
But, one of the things, though, that Bob, I think that she fears, and what's so fascinating is that it hasn't applied to Trump, is the flying soundbite that defines you. I mean, her comment inside of a very long interview to Diane Sawyer, we were broke when we left the White House, right? That became for her like an Al Gore in the internet nightmare. It's like...
But that's what she said.
Yes, it is what she said, but look at what...
that's what she meant.
That is what she meant. It's fine, but the question is, why did that end up being such a defining... sort of killer boomerang to Hillary, whereas all the things that Trump has said,
Tina,
of course it is. Of course it was absurd. But compare it to the multi-absurdities of everything that Trump has said.
Yeah, but it's don't get into this idea of, well, Trump's done 10 times as badly. Fair enough, and those things are on the record and they're under the microscope. Believe me, by journalists and voters. But that doesn't mean you don't do Hillary.
Of course not. I mean, I'm not suggesting that you don't do Hillary.
But you're
I think she's saying why she's hesitant to put herself out there.
Yeah, I'm saying that is why she's hesitant to put herself out there. Of course you would.
Does she have somebody in her entourage who would, when she said that, we were dead broke or whatever, say to her, hey, that was a mistake. You shouldn't have said that. That is not going to be credible, particularly when you've gone on, you and your husband, to make all of this money. She made a mistake.
She did, but that's the point. That's what she's so desperately afraid of doing. She's afraid that she's going to talk for 20 minutes about her policy, about criminal justice, and then suddenly, like slip and use a word like super predator. And then it undermines everything that she said before. I think that the fear of that flying soundbite being this curse of her the next 6 months has made her into a fetal position of fear. I'm not saying it's a good thing that she's in that position, but I think that is what's driving it.
Okay, Tina, if that's what's driving it, what's going to happen if she becomes president and Vladimir Putin confronts her? Is she going to be able to hold her own? I think there's all the evidence in the world that she can. But the idea that she's sitting around and worried about, oh my God, I'm going to make a slip. I'm going to say something that I felt or thought. We're sitting here having this conversation and it's not scripted. It's not planned. Probably one of us.
Well, we're not running for president, Bob. We're not running for president.
Thank God.
No, but we live in a spotlight, and probably one of us said something we wish we hadn't said. Probably me, and
much more likely me, Bob.
That happens.
So much more likely me.
Okay, but when that happens, then you kind of say, I stepped on it. Mm-hmm. That was a silly thing to say. People are forgiving. Everyone knows people who say things that are silly or a mistake, and the idea that drives her into a defensive crouch, it is not testimony to what I know is her strength.
And yet I would agree with Tina. I think that's true. I think she feels this is hers to lose, and why risk it if she's going to be really challenged, even though I agree also with Tina that is when she is best.
At her best. I mean, I think
when
great
she's really challenged about some specific policy. And I also think combined her unwillingness to kind of step in it, as you said, Bob, coupled with her inability to say, I screwed up. That's a pretty bad combination for dealing with the media.
Okay, but whose fault is that? The media's?
No,
not at all.
Well, I think the media critique, though, is a little bit different, which is that Trump is being graded on a curve. That even if, as Tina says, he makes 10 times as many mistakes, if he utters 10 times the number of falsehoods, the coverage is presented as equal. And so, for example, when she gave a very well-researched speech, after which she answered no questions, so that could be a fault, but she gave a speech in which she, demonstrated in remarkable detail Trump's connections to a bunch of white supremacists and racist elements. And then Trump, in the middle of a rally the same day, yelled Hillary Clinton's a bigot. And on a lot of the news programs, those two things were treated as equal. And so, Bob, Tina, do you think that there is a reckoning that's going to happen after this election in which the conclusion is not, no, we shouldn't cover Hillary Clinton critically. The conclusion is that there's got to be some fairness in terms of the amount that the whip or the zapper is applied to these two candidates.
But that's the internet culture and this impatience and speed. They both effectively called the other a bigot, right? So you cover that. Whether one was well researched versus one that was off the top of his head, you can make that point, and I think some people did, but you kind of have to cover that. I think, and this is what's I want to, this is almost a constitutional point. But we have a democracy, and people are going to vote, and people are going to get it. People are a lot smarter, and the job we have is to put it out there. Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Post, said, so our goal is no one can go into the voting booth in November and say, I couldn't find out who these two candidates were. And so we have a lot of his money going to hire extra reporters and editors to make this, I think, unparalleled, monumental effort to answer that question for people. Now, the volume, you can't keep up with it. Can you three keep up with it?
No, well, that brings us back to where we were at the beginning, which is sometimes the volume, it doesn't matter what you're revealing with what rigor. If the volume is so intense, people forget it. They have brain fade. And, well, let's face it, how many people are reading these great stories in the Washington Post? They don't land with the kind of impact they landed in the 70s and 80s when the paper was, one of 4 or 5 major places that people got their news. It's not like being
I feel like mostly political journalists are reading what political journalists are writing. And I wonder how much it's sinking in to the general population.
I think that's a fair question, and it's uncharted territory. But that doesn't mean we should stop doing what we're doing.
Let's bring it home, Bob and Tina and Brian. I'd love to hear your perspective on this. We're about 2 months away from Election Day. What should the media be doing in these next 2 months? And I guess the second part of that question is, will it really matter?
Well, more what matters is what the candidates do than what the media does, because it's a question of how they're going to handle these 2 months ahead. I feel that Trump, when he thinks he is losing, is going to really do the kind of thing you do when a retreating army retreats and starts to kind of blaze his guns in every direction. That he will go out in a blaze of bomb attacks, as it were, more and more crazily extreme, because he'll want to retain that cadre of the electorate for himself for whatever he does later. Hillary, I think, was just going to try and be as cautious as she can and not be forced to answer things that could create the flying soundbite, as we've discussed. I think the media, I think presentation is very important. I do think that sometimes, you don't get a sense that this is the big story, pay attention. Of course, you have to do the incremental coverage. But I do think, the newsrooms have to sort of gather themselves together and say, what are the 4 big stories now? And just report the hell out of these defining stories and really make sure that they haven't left one stone unturned. I mean, the New York Times did a wonderful piece, I thought, on all of Trump's real estate deals. Unfortunately, it came out the same weekend that the Pulse bombing happened in Florida, so actually didn't have the same impact, which I think it would have had if that tragedy hadn't occurred. Because, of course, you're also racing not just the media coverage of the election, but you're also racing the wild news environment that we've been living in. I mean, in the summer, I think no one was really paying attention to politics because of this constant tragedies that we're hitting at every turn.
But when these stories don't land, as Tina said, Bob, do you think it's because it's more of a feeling that is motivating Trump's supporters rather than details of his business dealings or the way he's behaved in certain situations or Trump University? It's this overall anger and this visceral reaction to him as a candidate and what he could do that means these stories just don't really matter.
Well, yeah, but you can't sit around. If you go back to some of the Nixon Watergate coverage, I remember Ben Bradley, our editor, would say, just keep doing it. Keep trying to find out what's going on. And somebody would say, well, it didn't get picked up by television. No one is talking about it. In fact, no one believes it. And, a good editor is going to say, just keep going. And the answer to Katie's question, what should we do? Keep following it. I think in September and October, there is that cliche about the October surprise, something happening that really turns things around. Events are going to occur that maybe will determine or have a huge impact on the outcome of this election.
And how the candidates respond to them, too, how the candidates respond to those huge events.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But a number of people have said from the intelligence world, the CIA world, that if there is a major terrorist attack in this country, that will help Trump. Now, I'm not so sure of that. It depends on the timing, who was behind it, how big it is, what the impact is, because a lot of people will say, well, he's tough. He's tough. Now, Hillary Clinton's tough also in a different way, but there could be occurrences like that in the security terrorism field, in the world of the economy, which is still not as robust and resilient as it should be. So, I think the message should be keep your seatbelt on.
And I'd add one more thing to answer Katie's question, which is I think the press ought to focus on what the candidates plan to do as president. I think often there's a fake sophistication on the part of a lot of reporters that, we don't really pay attention to these campaign promises because we all know that after they're elected, they toss them out. But that's really not true. And the political science bears this out. Campaign promises are the single best indicator of what the policies the candidates plan to pursue in office. And so even if it isn't the sexiest coverage, I'd argue for, really rigorous analysis of what the candidates are actually proposing. What do their plans say?
Wouldn't have worked with Richard Nixon, though, as Bob said.
Right. And that's the difficulty. No one believes it because when people get in office, they're going to do what they want or what necessity dictates. And there's a downside to that, but there's also an upside.
Can I ask one question of you guys before we let you go? I've always wanted to ask this actually of both of you as two of the journalists I admire most. Bob, you've written these bestsellers about Richard Nixon, and you know him better than just about anybody. And Tina, you wrote this bestseller of another person who was sort of at the center of the media maelstrom, Princess Diana. Do you see any of those two iconic characters in either of the candidates that we're all covering this year, or at least in the media environment that we're covering?
Well, Diana was the first internet death, if you like. I mean, when she died, it was the first time that a celebrity death had been covered on every medium all the time, everywhere. It began the mass carpet bombing media era that we have entered into. So in that sense, I guess she is more of a in the Trump genealogy than she is the Hillary genealogy, because, she started for this huge celebrity that then just magnified and magnified and magnified so that everything she did became a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. And her relationship with the media was as combative and as co-opting at the same time. So there are some aspects there, I guess, but certainly, her humanitarian side was way more in line with Hillary.
It's unfair to compare any candidate to Nixon, quite frankly. And people have ascribed Nixonian tendencies to both Trump and Hillary. I think that's unfair. Nixon was unique. He was a criminal president who violated the law, who resigned when he realized that the entire Republican Party and Republican establishment had turned against him. As Barry Goldwater said, Goldwater being the conscience of the Republican Party for many, many years, said too many lies, too many crimes. And we've had lots of untruths from both candidates. No one has established a crime from either of them. I think I think it's probably going to turn out okay because voters are very smart. I was off giving a speech some weeks ago down south, and some man stood up and said, "I'm confused. I don't know what to do. Help me." And I said, look, you get to decide. You get to decide where you're going to get your information. It's personal. And then he wanted help. And I think we need to give him more help in our business, more information, even if people don't look at it or listen or read. At least the data is there. And in the end, majority of people are going to be able to say, I'm going to do this, and that's who's going to be the next president.
So when you look to the future, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the state of journalism?
I'm sorry, like you people have to get up in the morning and work at it. And the thought I have, because I think I can say this literally, when I get up in the morning, my thought is, what are the bastards hiding? Whoever they are. Because they are out there. And, with political good intent, trying to protect something, or maybe with less good intent. But people are hiding things. I remember Al Gore once said, when asked what percentage of what goes on in government that's of consequence do we know? And he said 1%.
Right.
And that's, of course, Gore being exaggerating. We know a lot more than 1%. Maybe it's 50, maybe it's 60%. But there's a lot we don't know and about what goes on in government, and there's a lot we don't know about who these people really are.
Well, I'm very glad that Bob is there, digging away, shoveling with his pick.
Well, I could talk to you both. Brian, I know, agrees for hours. I didn't even get a chance to talk to you about the role Facebook is playing in news distribution. So maybe we can do part 2 of this podcast following the election. Bob and Tina, thank you both so much for your time. It was great to talk to you.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
So we want to thank Bob Woodward and Tina Brown for participating in the show today. We also want to thank Greta Cohn, the Reverend John Delore, and Zach Dinerstein for producing this show. Also a special shout out to Mark Phillips for our terrific theme music. And thank you for listening. If you want to leave us a message, please do so at 929-224-4637. As always, I will be standing by the phone. Also, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. It helps other listeners to find it.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Hey folks, it's me, Mark Maron. And if you love podcasts you don't want to miss, now hear this. A really big podcasting festival coming in October to the Los Angeles area. Come see me and lots of shows you love. More than 30 great podcasts live on 6 stages. It'll be a weekend full of laughs, storytelling, and your favorite hosts up close. You've got Earwolf favorites like Comedy Bang Bang and with special guest Lauren Lapkus, plus more great shows like Brilliant Idiots, Criminal, and The Moth. And I'm doing a special WTF as well. Do a VIP pass for meet and greets with your favorite hosts. Sit up close in reserved seating. Hang out in the VIP lounge and get more special perks as well. It all happens at Now Hear This, October 28th through the 30th in Anaheim, California, right near Los Angeles. Don't miss it. Go to nowhearthisfest.com to buy your tickets. Okay? Good. Great.
This has been an Earwolf production, executive produced by Scott Ackerman and Chris Bannon. For more information and content, visit earwolf.com.